Una mattina mi sono svegliato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sono svegliato e ho trovato l'invasor.
As a cheap video format to get back into making videos regularly again, and in celebration of the end of World War II and Adolf Hitler's suicide, I am proudly presenting the Nazi shooting reviews. As part of that, I will be reviewing a handful of video games that allow you to kill Nazis. I'm aware that there has been other channels that had the format of reviewing games that let you kill Nazis. However, I think this format really lends itself to my channel as well. If these videos turn out to be popular enough or interesting enough for me to make, I may or may not start a secondary channel where I do these kinds of reviews, or I will just upload them here. But for now, this is gonna be a one-time thing. But let's get into the game. And what better game could there be than the game that started it all? Yes, we're going to talk about the grandfather of first-person shooters, Wolfenstein 3D. Now, before I actually get into the game, I will give you a little history lesson, because I am sure that there's some people that don't even know Wolfenstein 3D anymore. And that's kind of sad, but that's why I'm gonna explain it to you. Wolfenstein 3D was published by id Software on the 5th of May 1992, so approximately 27 years ago. For those unfamiliar with the history of the FPS genre, id Software are also famous for their later games, such as Doom or Quake. In the game you assume the role of the American soldier William B.J. Blazkowicz, and your main objective is fleeing from the Nazi-occupied Castle Wolfenstein. You start out with only a weak knife and a pistol and have to fight your way through the castle. What makes this game special though is that it was the first of its kind. The basic premise of running through corridors, shooting enemies and finding secrets wasn't that special really. 2D side-scrollers and top-down shooters have been doing that for a while. What makes Wolfenstein special is the new first-person perspective. The first-person perspective didn't just help immerse the player, it also added a new kind of difficulty, because seeing an enemy that is standing behind you is a lot harder in a first-person perspective compared to a top-down or side-scrolling perspective. Obviously nowadays it's pretty easy to nitpick on the bad graphics with its pseudo 3D, 90-degree walls, untextured floors and roofs, and repeating textures in the game overall, but at the time it was quite revolutionary. But even so, it's not that pleasing to the eye nowadays, so I took the liberty to install ECWolf, which is a source port of Wolfenstein, to at least make the resolution a bit better. So we're going from this to this. The high resolution doesn't do much to improve the graphics of Wolfenstein 3D, but I think that most other mods that you could install probably wouldn't be that faithful to the original look of Wolfenstein. And being able to see enemies at a distance is quite important, because the closer the enemies are, the more damage they do to you, which is a relic of the early phases of Wolfenstein 3D where it was supposed to be a stealth game. However, the concept of Wolfenstein being a stealth game was discarded during development because they realized that the most fun part within engine limitations was the shooting. Knowing this, you can find a bunch of things in Wolfenstein 3D that serve as a reminder to Wolfenstein 3D's stealth beginnings. For example, every now and then you can sneak up behind a Nazi soldier without him noticing you and kill him first. Your gunshots alert other Nazi soldiers in the area, and the music doesn't sound like it's supposed to be an action shooter, but like it's supposed to be a stealth game. To talk about some mechanics that did stick with Wolfenstein 3D, let's take a look at the status bar. The first thing the status bar displays is floors. The floors represent what level of an episode you're in, and they're called floors because due to Wolfenstein 3D's pseudo 3D perspective, all the levels are plain floors. And that's because Wolfenstein 3D uses a really primitive version of raycasting. To simplify, when you play a level of Wolfenstein 3D, the game does not actually load a 3D space. Instead, it takes a look at a top-down 2D map of the level you are currently playing. And on that 2D map, your field of view is basically a cone, and across that cone the game casts rays until they hit the next wall, and based on how far away the next wall is, the game knows how big or small the wall has to be to create the illusion of depth. So behind the scenes the game doesn't load a 3D game at all, it's basically a top-down shooter. Now because of this 2D system, you also don't have a Z-axis, which is why you can't aim up or down in Wolfenstein 3D. It's not that apparent because you don't really have a reason to aim up or down because all your enemies are on the same floor as you. However, it does get apparent in a game like Doom, where there is enemies on higher platforms and you can still kill them even though you're technically clearly missing them. So there you have it, Wolfenstein 3D is not 3D, and neither is Doom. Man, I'm definitely the first one to figure this one out. Anyway, let's get back to shooting Nazis. The second thing you can see on the heads-up display is the score. And what do you get this score for? Well, for killing Nazis. To probably no one's surprise, the standard enemy in Wolfenstein 3D is the Nazi soldier. But the Nazi forces in this game come in all different kinds of shapes and forms. Namely as the Nazi soldier, the SS soldier, the mutant, the officer and the German shepherd. I gotta say, it felt wrong mowing down dozens of pixelated dogs, but they are Nazi dogs, so I'm gonna bend my values. As for every other enemy in the game, I may be killing dozens of family fathers, but they are Nazis, so I couldn't be bothered. There is also bosses at the end of every episode, the most famous one probably being Adolf Hitler. However, I think it was a bad decision that he is the boss of episode 3, which is midway through the game, because all the bosses that come afterwards are kind of boring. Because even outside of a World War II setting you can't really top Hitler. And while the actual final boss does have a funny name, he is rather generic. And I don't give enough of a shit about the story of Wolfenstein 3D to read up why General Fettgesicht is the final boss. But that's my main criticism of the enemies in Wolfenstein 3D in general. They are rather generic, and the most interesting enemy is probably the mutants that shoot out of their chests by doing the Sieg Heil. Or should I say, Sieg Hell. Also, the kill cam feature at the end of the boss fights is really appreciated. I always wanted to see Hitler spill out into guts. Besides shooting Nazis, you can also collect treasure to increase your high score. The treasure is often used as bait to lure the player into traps, which I find is pretty interesting. However, the biggest trap about the treasure is probably the pickup sound, which I am pretty sure has been used for torture at some point. But these traps, for example, are one of the things that make me marvel at Wolfenstein 3D even today, because it was so ambitious for its time. It had enemies that can detect sounds and chase you down. It had enemies that cannot detect you if you are behind them. It had these traps and gameplay gimmicks that change up the game. And as someone who only played Wolfenstein 3D a few days ago, I'm quite impressed what this game does. And I am genuinely happy that the FPS genre was invented by a game that lets you shoot Nazis like that. However, the high score system isn't one of these systems that was way ahead of its time. As a matter of fact, I don't really understand why they had to put it in there, and it's kind of pointless. I guess it makes some sense in the way that you can replay the game and try and get a better score, but without a means to compare to other players, a high score system just feels out of place. Same thing applies to the life system, to be honest, because while playing I noticed that Wolfenstein 3D is kind of an unforgiving game. You lose all weapons upon dying, and there is a game over where you have to restart the entire episode, which really sucks, because Wolfenstein 3D is not that easy of a game actually. As for our main protagonist, BJ is portrayed by a portrait on the bottom of the screen. It not only displays his visage, it also implies his health. About BJ himself, he is a stereotypical American super soldier. However, the developers of id Software are self-aware enough to know that this portrayal of American soldiers is quite biased. Then again, I don't think that Wolfenstein 3D is a game that's meant to be taken that seriously anyway, especially looking at some of John Carmack's quotes from that time, and at the fact that the game has Sieg Heil mutants and Mecha Hitler. So it's not like the game is even trying to be accurate or anything, and you can also see that in the weapons. The weapons are vaguely based on a Luger pistol, an MP40 and a chain gun, but that's about it. I have to say that it wasn't the guns themselves that made Wolfenstein 3D, it was rather how you used them. But looking back at Wolfenstein as the grandfather of the FPS genre, I have to say that I am quite satisfied with it. And while it wasn't a game that made first-person shooters widely popular yet, I have to say that we were off to a really good start with Wolfenstein 3D. I'm going to end on this note. I wish Wolfenstein 3D a happy 27th anniversary, and I wish everyone else a happy 74th anniversary of the liberation from fascism. I got some theoretical videos in the pipeline, but until then, see you next time, comrades.
Es geht durch die Welt ein Geflüster. Arbeiter, hörst du es nicht? Das sind die Stimmen der Kriegsminister. Arbeiter, hörst du sie nicht? Es flüstern die Kohle- und Stahlproduzenten. Es flüstert die chemische Kriegsproduktion. Es flüstert von allen Kontinenten. Mobilmachung gegen die Sowjetunion.